I am the marketing officer for AUK. I am the National LGBTQIA+ manager for the Pagan Federation. I'm on the interim board for the Pagan Federation, and I am the council representative for the committee for the Pagan Federation. I'm the social media coordinator for Pagan Aid. I am infamously obsessed with the Valkyries, and I get invited, giggles at the front here, they know exactly what's happening. I get invited at events to talk about the Valkyries, both online and in person. I speak at Pride events about inclusive heathenry and inclusive paganism. I basically get myself elbow deep into anything to do with this area of interest.
Breaker of Chains, Mother of Dragons.
Many titles. I am the co-author and illustrator for the Weird Less Woven, an alternative prayer book, heathen prayer book with Dan Cultus. I'm currently working on a book that has a publisher attached to it about the Valkyries called Valkyria, Servant or Master. This is exactly my wheelhouse, and if we run under time, you may get an impromptu Valkyrie speech, if we've got time for it. Fingers crossed. I think that's about it. Kieran?
Yeah, I'm Kieran Gregson of a few less titles. I'm the merchandising officer for AUK. I also work as the interfaith officer as well. I'm the go-to for the Heathens of Lothian. I live just outside Edinburgh, so all the Lothians around there is who we support as a kindred. I work with Edinburgh Interfaith, whereas I represent Asatru UK there, where I run workshops in schools teaching kids about heathenry, ensuring people end up on the right path, and other faith organisations understand who we are. That's me.
Fantastic. So this talk is about white supremacy, and unfortunately how prevalent it has been in the establishment of modern heathenry. We shouldn't overlook it, we shouldn't diminish it, we should acknowledge that it had quite a significant role in where we stand today. Of course, that's not to say to accept it, we need to challenge it at all times, and that's a big part of what I do and what Kieran does, is presenting a force of inclusive heathenry that people can point to and go, okay, they're inclusive, they're LGBT plus supportive and all of that. Because unfortunately there is a heavy media bias against showcasing, for good reasons, the prevalence of the far right when it comes to Nordic heathenry and the appropriation of Nordic symbols. So to start out this talk off in a place that makes the most sense, what is heathenry? It is a rather formal title that is given to the revival or reconstruction or the modern practice of pre-Christian Germanic beliefs, religious structure. They didn't have a name for it back then, it was just called the old ways. The term heathen was rather derogatory, but it is being embraced by modern pagans as a kind of a rallying cry, as it were, to get behind and to re-establish themselves, and it's a callback to the historical. Heathen, of course, meant non-practicing Christian, anyone else that was other outside of that. There is some record that it applied to atheists, but predominantly it was applied to those that practiced the old ways, the pagan gods, pagan beliefs. So with that out of the way, let's not drag this on for much longer. Let's talk about the white supremacist foundations for modern heathenry. Much of this goes back to Wagner and Germanic Romanticism, the Grimm brothers, and so many others before them. There was a disillusionment, a disenfranchisement with the German people over the 18th, 19th and 20th centuries, that they played on people's fear of being replaced. And to keep it somewhat brief in terms of the history, because I could do quite a lengthy talk about German Romanticism and all of that, but it was really stemmed from the 19th century, late 19th century, early 20th century idea of Nordicism. And this was the idea that the Nordic races, that is to say, code word for white race, were superior to all others. And this was, it stemmed from the frankly ridiculous concept of the, these were the people that were part of the Nordic realms, and they became stronger and smarter and more rigorous because they had to endure the harsh temperatures, and became robust and most excellent and better than everyone else. We then have people like Arthur Schopenhauer, who came up with a hierarchy of races, and again he came up with the ridiculous concept that the white race was the starter of civilization. Very ahistorical. Anyone with a glancing knowledge of history knows that's absolute nonsense. But again, this was all of this has a history of pseudoscience, a history of revisionism. They picked and chose and made up stuff when it didn't fit their rhetoric. So yeah, you come across a lot of language like the Indo-European peoples, and they say that they can trace that back to Atlantis and things like that, and a lot of actual materials to this day of the far right white supremacists still make that claim, and they have this romantic ideology of Atlantis as this kind of birthplace of superiority. But yeah, the Nordic race is naturally tied into this idea of embracing Nordic symbols, the runes, the gods, and romanticizing them, stripping them away of all of their as modern pagans, we quite like they're not infallible. There can be question there. They're not perfect, but these people, the white supremacists, certainly didn't see them that way. Odin became this omni-god, the Christian god essentially. Balder is Jesus, Loki is the devil, and they twisted these stories to fit that narrative. That's not to say, of course, that the Nazi beliefs were in any way pagan. If you saw the talk this morning, then that's not the case. But there was definitely look at these better times where the pagan religions of old were seen as the natural and organic religions, and Christianity as this outside force and not to be dabbled with. Again, not something that was held in belief by many among the upper echelons of the Nazi party, but was held by some. And then we have the Volkish movement, which happened around about the late 19th century, earliest 20th century. People like Guido von List, who was a pagan, and if you've heard of the Armanen ruins, they came from him. Again, they're not good for that for that reason. But the Volkish movement has innate ties to the German national conservatism. So yeah, the Volkish movement was a gradual effort to sow an essence of demonizing the other. The criteria for the ideal German was taken from Nietzsche's Übermensch, the Superman, but whereas Nietzsche's ideas were spiritual, this became something twisted into something that was the white race is superior. They are the Supermen. The blonde-haired, blue-eyed person is innately better than everyone else. And today, folkish heathenry follows much of those same rules, stemming from Volk, the people, and they're bad. So I'll pass it on to Kieran to talk about UK heathenry and its ties to the folkish movement and the folkish heathenry.
Yeah, so it connects in that way, where the Volkish connection makes its way over to Britain through Oswald Mosley. You've heard him, the founder of the British Union of Fascists in, I think, 1933. He took his inspiration from Mussolini, and then later the ideas of Adolf Hitler fed into his rhetoric. Thankfully, he didn't have quite the influence on the British public that he really wanted. He was pushed out in a lot of ways, but still had a fundamental underlying of support by the British public. In the 1970s, 1973, we had a group called the Odinic Right that was established. That was by a fellow called John Yole. He was the bodyguard for Oswald Mosley. And you can see his fascist ideas making its way into into heathenry directly there. The Authentic Right is an out-and-out neo-Nazi group. Their page states things like ethno-religion and is clearly only targeted at what they would determine as Aryan or the white people. They have charity status in the UK, along with the Odinist Fellowship, which is an offshoot that formed in the 90s. They run the Newark Temple, which is a converted Christian church that they use as their Hof. Hopefully no one's been there, because you do have to pay to get in. You really don't want to be supporting organisations like that. How they managed to get charity status, I have no idea. But it's very unlikely they'll ever lose it. There's only been, I think, 5 organisations that have ever lost charity status in British history. So they are here to stay. Thankfully, they don't really do too well in the young population. Most of them are getting on. So in a couple of years, hopefully, we won't have to worry about them anymore. But until then, they are around. Gets a lot more negative, a lot more insidious when it comes to groups like the Woden's Folk, who were established in '98 by a member of the National Front called Geoffrey Dunn. The National Front, along with Combat 12, have quite a foothold, are a main part of that group. They are a terrorist organisation who have attempted to commit assassinations and attacks on the British public, people who they don't see as antithesis to their ideals. And these are the people that we fight against online. The ideas that they push of using images like the Black Sun, which is an out-and-out neo-Nazi symbol. The use of things like the 9 Noble Virtues, which was invented by Stephen McMullen.
Yeah, one of them was. There was like two branches. One of them was Gold and McNarland.
Yeah, so that was established by them, and that's one of the things you see posted on Facebook pages constantly, the 9 Noble Virtues, and people don't understand where these concepts come from. I mean, they look pretty harmless when you read them themselves, but even the ideas themselves, they harken back to Christendom. They're essentially set out to be the new 10 Commandments. Most of what they do is just taking Christianity and co-opting Nordic imagery and shoving it in, making it fit into their warped perspective of the world. And they're insidious. They spread through organisations, and you have to really keep on top of it and ensure that you cut them out. But they are a fundamental part and history of the movement. We look at people like Edward Thorson, who was a founding member of the AFA, it's the Asatru Folk Assembly in the United States, and he's still referenced as one of the main sources for the runes in books to this day. Early 2000s, early 90s, they were the be all and end all, and they're still referenced, even when they were poorly researched and now don't really stand up to any scrutiny, but they're still a main part of academic heathenry right now, and they really need to move past this. And I know a lot of academics are now in the inclusive side, but it's not really well known still. You can get away with it, you can just use it in the 90s and people couldn't look people up on Google, but you can't do the same thing now. These people have Wikipedia pages and we know who they are. The ideas of these symbols as well being used by modern biker gangs and things. I know it comes up with the police plaguing network that police will see people wearing Mjolnirs and such, and they associated them with biker gangs. So you immediately get a negative reputation based on just what you're wearing because of the history of these things. So that's why we have to work on reclaiming it through interfaith and such. So from there we'll get on to modern, what we do as AUK now and how we prevent it.
AUK was founded in its current form in 2013, and really since then it's been growing from strength to strength as an inclusive force against these rather insidious groups. We hold a massive gathering every year that's just getting larger and larger, and we hold inclusivity as our founding values, where others might say not worship Loki due to whatever image they have of him. That's certainly not what we do. We worship Loki. We hold that to be inclusive is central to heathen beliefs. This idea of building community, building frith. Everything outside of that is exclusionary. and that is not conducive to building a community, and that's not being heathen in our perspective. I think we should also mention Stonehenge.
Yeah.
Rather recently, this was mentioned in the talk this morning by Kaz. What was it? Was it last year?
Yeah, it was last year.
Last year, wow, okay. There was an announcement. The AFA, the Asatru Folk Assembly, who are a recognised hate group, they designated a Hof builder, which is basically a recruiter, on UK soil, and he was rather naively posting all over the place that there was going to be a Winter Nights event at Stonehenge. Beep, 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 beep. The pagan groups were like, oh no, this is bad, because they've been trying for years and years and years to establish themselves on UK soil. There are some members, but it's negligible almost, although we still have to fight against them. And the swiftness with which these pagan organisations united, often seen as rather disparate, it was quite astonishing to see that they all were like, oh, okay, we normally kind of are like ships in the night, just kind of like waving at each other, recognising we exist, but not really communicating outside of specific symposiums and groups. But this happened over the course of a few days. There was a petition and signatories, and a massive show of force, which was incredibly heartening to see, because of the AFA have been flourishing in the US. I believe they're still the largest group in the US, the Heathen group.
They have multiple Hofs now. They have 7 Hofs across different states.
Yeah.
That have thousands of paying members who pay significant dues every year. So they're well funded and well populated.
Yeah, they have numerous temples over the United States, and obviously, watching from the UK, there's very little we can do until they try and make a move. There was. So you name a pagan organisation, chances are they were involved in this over here in the UK. So that was incredible to see. And the event got cancelled. The guy disappeared off all of their socials, and message received, I guess, was the answer to that one. But yeah, do you want to talk about one of the spaces we create,
Sure.
and probably some red flags?
Yeah, so Asatru UK, while we are out here fighting hate as well, we're not the only organisation. There's the Symposium, the Confederation of UK Heathen Kindreds, there's many other individual kindreds, there's the Symposium and the Pagan Federation, who all help foster safe and inclusive spaces online. Do this through screening processes, so we have specific questions and rules people sign up to before they join pages, and then we check out profiles before they join, ensure basically they are who they say they are, and they're going to be held accountable if they do say things. We push this inclusive messagery on our pages through having outreach officers and such, through interfaith organisations, so like one that I'm part of in Edinburgh, where I attend schools and bring our heathen messages to children, ensuring that they get the right imagery, as youths. So I'm losing it a bit.
Yeah, let's talk about red flags.
Yeah, sorry, red flags.
Yeah, if we're the vetting process is something we have to do, and when it comes to these sorts of things, you start to recognise patterns. We've mentioned the 9 noble virtues. That can be a bit of an orange flag. That is to say that some people use them without knowing the history, and they're also, I don't want to say vague, but again, they don't seem bad.
They're not dangerous in and of themselves. It's who it connects it to. It's these pages that are like, we'd say Asatru pages, or these these pages online that they every single meme is posted with a picture of Ragnar Lothbrok from the Vikings TV show or something with some ridiculous messaging. And these pages, you look at you'll find these pages and they're shared from another page onto this page. You trace it back and you end up somewhere very negative very quickly from a lot of these things.
And a lot of this is kind of a lack of information.
Yeah.
So a lot of the work we do is educating, informing, and just sharing knowledge, but in a way that is obviously openly inclusive. And we also offer kind of like pathways of de-radicalization, because some people, they just fall into these spaces, they know nothing else. You know, for them it's not so much a case of being from a malicious place, but just a lack of information, and we're aware of that. We have some prominent members of the community who came from the far right and are now the champions of inclusivity within the organisation. So the stuff you want to look out for if you're a practicing heathen is the use of folk, going from volkish. If someone says they're folkish, or the people, or overemphasis on the people, or these are our people, you know, we are the folk, all of that. This is language that should send off little alarm bells in your head. We've mentioned the black sun, which we have an image here. We don't. It would have been useful, but it's basically a 12 spoke sun wheel, like a little circle and then a bigger circle, and then these 12 willow runes around the outside. It is, unfortunately, there's a lot of misinformation out there about it being an ancient pagan symbol. It isn't. People tend to link to awful sites if they're trying to argue that, but it was first found in Himmler's castle, big mosaic pattern on the floor. That's the first instance we have. We have absolutely nothing that looks like it prior to that. We have sun wheels, just not that look like the black sun. If you see Indo-European used excessively, that's also a bad sign. Of course, outright Nazi terms such as blood and soil, anything that goes heavily into ancestry, blood, DNA, genetics, because these people believe fundamentally that they are of the gods. They take the history literally. They believe they are better because they were descendants from Odin or Woden, if you want to go for more Anglo-Saxon edge. There's a lot also of drinking from your own well. Now this is a little bit more subtle, because it's a case of, if you're not Northern European white, then they'll be diverting people away from heathenry. They'll be going, oh, just look at your own practices, you know, and then they'll go heavily into, you know, these aren't for you, and before they go into more explicitly racist ways of phrasing it. Unfortunately, we also have runes. I'm covered in rune tattoos, and unfortunately that is also becoming, within the police, although we do work with the police, we have massive pagan organisations, the Police and Pagan Association, who are our policemen, and they help to inform those sorts of places about the contextual nuance of having a Mjolnir or having runes on your person, and saying that this person isn't a Nazi if they're wearing them. You've got to, you know, have a bit of nuance, a little bit of consideration. They might be heathen.
Same with most symbols. You've got to take them as a flag, but they're not. It's not the be all and end all. And if someone's posting, you know, Tiwaz, Sowelo, and Othala every day as their only 3 runes, you might think, can I have a bit of a better look into them? You know, they're all 3 runes that were used by the Nazi Party, and it's, you know, it's something you've got to watch out for. I mean, while they could be posting completely innocently, it might just happen to be their 3 favourite runes. You've got to look a bit deeper.
Which is a shame, because I like those runes.
Yeah, but the one you do see is the winged Othala as well. It's an Othala with 2 wings coming off the bottom
little
as well.
Boots, little Nazi boots.
And that's Nazi boots. And the same with the Ermin Soul as well, which is becoming a bit more. People are a bit more aware of it now. The Ermin Soul is the historical tree that was used by Germanic peoples as part of their worship. Don't know particularly how or exactly what it looked like. But we had a rendition that was. When was it first publicised? It was a long time ago. But it turns out, you know, it's completely, that drawing itself is completely ahistorical. It wasn't a historic representation of it, and the person who first prescribed it that meaning was a fascist. So while it's not an immediate, you know, this is someone coming from a negative standpoint, you've just got to be aware of it. It's just, as I say, red flags. It's not cut them off immediately. It's a look a bit deeper when you see these things. Yeah,
I think it's important to say that while we fight against the far right, we take every opportunity to come over here, let's talk, listen. Obviously you can't with some people, some of them you shouldn't either, because at a certain point you're jeopardising the community by letting them in. So it's getting that careful balance between, you know, if you're open to talking, here we are, but realising we have a community to protect as well. A community that, you know, we love very dearly. What else? What was
Other pushes we're doing with the prison service at the minute. So there's an attempt to sort of have a codified ritual book and guidance book that we'll be giving out to prisons across the UK. That's one of the main points of radicalisation. The fact that US organisations and British organisations, racist organisations, will target prisons as vulnerable people that they can recruit. So we want to get ahead of them. We've got connections with pagan chaplains. I think there's 13 pagan chaplains in the UK who monitor their prisons and ensure that the right literature, the wrong literature doesn't make its way into their hands. But they don't cover every prison. So we want to get our own literature into these prisons and make sure people have that, the right starting point in their faith. People just want that spiritual connection. We just need to make sure they're not going the wrong path to get there.
Yeah, that's crucially important. It reminds me of a case recently, a murder case, that lit up my social feeds, the Delphi murder case, if anyone's heard of that, which the defence launched it's an Odinist ritual. And before you know it, a lot of heathen organisations were being asked, is this you? Are you the Odinists? Absolutely terrible, but it was an opportunity to basically sit down with people and be like, no, this is not heathenry. This is a very specific branch of heathenry. These do not represent our beliefs. Putting aside that was a long-reach defence, it was a Hail Mary, as it were. But yeah, in terms of the inclusive heathenry, full stop, we want to emphasise that we're trying to recreate the religion, not the culture. There is a certain point where you have to recognise that Viking Age culture wasn't great. They owned slaves, they had parasites, short lifespans, all of that nastiness, and it's about taking the old ways and bringing them into the modern world in a way that makes sense to the way we live, our framework, our understanding of things, all of that. It's using the modern world as kind of scaffolding to try and piece together what we can. But that really is what AUK is about. It's not saying that the old ways were perfect, but that they were something we can choose to learn from in whatever capacity we want to. And the spaces we create are really about that, about community. First and foremost, in building community, building connections. Online communities are fantastic, and of course in terms of accessibility, they are the most accessible. But I think where AUK really shines is in the in-person events. If you can make them. Because there you are, worshipping in a group in person and connecting with people. And really what we want to do is making sure we have an online equivalent where we can. So we're looking into streaming and that sort of thing. Because we want people to find their home. As cheesy as that is, that's basically how I came to AUK, was in finding the people that believed as I did. And that was an amazing moment for me. But
yeah, no, people find it very difficult to show up to an event for the first time, blind, but you've always got to do it at some point. And I think we put on 5 events a year at the minute.
yeah.
Mixture of camping, bunkhouse, and in city. We're doing the thing called the Nurth Initiative at the minute, which is our fundraising project to try and get our own land, build our own half. That'll be open to everyone all year round, where people can gather and actually have an inclusive space that isn't like the only one you've got as an option right now. So yeah, we're doing a climb up Ben Nevis at the minute. It's going on in a few weeks.
Yeah.
A bunch of other raffles and stuff as well. There's a lot going on with the Nurths at the minute. But we'll get there. It'll take us a few years, but we're growing.
Yeah, it's going to be a steady, continuous journey, but one with constant improvement and wanting to reflect the community as best as possible.
And that's one of the things we do as well. It's that slow growth. It's that gradual growth. I mean, AUK grows at 20-30% a year. It's not. It doesn't blow up like other organisations. We don't push out there. We don't do mass advertisement. We don't pay for anything like that. Because we don't want to bring in thousands of people a year, because you don't know who's joining then. You're not able to build that relationship with individuals. I mean, I know nearly everyone that's in AUK that we've seen at events over the years. When it gets grows and grows, you don't know who's there. You don't know. It's a lot harder to safekeep and keep your community safe when you don't know who's coming along.
So yeah, I think that's about it.
That's about it. Yeah.
So any questions at all? Hello.
How do you de-radicalise somebody?
That's a good question. It's about giving them the space, the information, the resources, the knowledge to challenge their perspective, their views, and really a lot of it comes from fear and hatred. They have been in echo chambers where what might have been a tiny, small feeling of like disenfranchisement just grows and grows and grows to gradual. They use recruits to kind of like sow these greater seeds of fear and hatred. And I think by opening up a space with the community safety in mind, where we go, look, here's what we represent. Here are our beliefs. This is where a lot of them quite like the historical grounding. So we say often that these pre-Christian Germanic beliefs were never exclusionary, and they get materials that are just wrong. We've talked about Stephen Flowers and Edward Thorson, which uses a lot of misinformation in terms of the material that is produced. And the AFA material is poorly researched, to the point where once you start showing alternatives, the gears start turning of just like, okay, obviously not everyone can be de-radicalized, but it's about having those conversations when you can and showing them a different path when that is an option available. There's different like pipelines that we can go down, and obviously we liaise with like Prevent and Exit Hate, who are the authorities in that area, and we basically keep everyone informed about any like far right kind of awful groups popping up, and it's all about just sharing information. And luckily it doesn't happen too frequently in terms of having those far right influences pretend to come in or whatever. In fact, I can't think of one off the top of my head, but I think just by showing them that here's a community of hundreds of people at an event, we are not far right with the absolute opposite of that.
Yeah, it's different. It's when someone is part of one of these organisations like the Ethnic Right, it's going to be, it's not really going to be viable for us to do anything about that. That's going to be, on their own terms. It's people who come in, who they are intelligent people who have had troubles or difficult things in their life that have led them to a warped perspective, and it's giving them the connection with people who've had different experiences, who are those different people, that will teach them that that's not the way to be. People who are, people do get too far gone pretty quickly, but it's the people who are open-minded with some negative sensibilities who you're going to be able to change their minds by just meeting people. We've had in my kindred a couple of people who are anti-trans, and then we've got a lot of trans people in our kindred. So after time, it starts being a problem for them. It's just they learn pretty quick once they engage with people who are different to them.
Yeah, that's the problem with online communities as well. Those echo chambers are prevalent, and the algorithms, whatever you want to call it, those groups, it's easy to find a group that is the only thing you're going to get from them is this idea of hate, fear, otherness, so the idea of like in-person community, those barriers are broken down a little bit. They can't keep going back to those echo chambers. So with social media, we have seen obviously these rise in kind of it's easier to find those spaces, and honestly, if you put in Heathenry, chances are you can quite easily find those spaces. So it's a difficult thing, and obviously it's entirely up to the individual as well. But yeah, we tend to work with those larger organisations that are specific for de-radicalisation to really lead the way on that. Cool.
Thanks.
That's no problem. Anyone else? Oh, cool. We've got it
I
over.
think, I'll go there.
Well, what time is it?
Yeah, about
Oh,
25 minutes.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you for listening.